Somewhere in the chaotic land of the United States, QQ is making a Scott Pilgrim video.
Yeah, you get what I'm going for. Look, I like to think I'm a fan of the Scott Pilgrim series. That movie is one of my all-time favorites. The game introduced me to my favorite band, Anamanaguchi, and I really like the anime. But all that media is technically outside of the original comics they're based on. Comics that I only read through once when I was in high school. So I embark on this Scott pilgrimage to reread the series again to see if it will still hit now that I'm older than the characters it depicts. Let's go. This is where it all begins. Our hero, Scott Pilgrim, is introduced as a 23-year-old dating a 17-year-old high schooler. Yikes. It's just to have something simple and nice, he explains to his sister Stacy. She brings up his most recent breakup and asks if this is him moving on or if he's insane. He is. Despite it all, you don't really hate the guy. Not yet, at least. His interactions with Knives, the aforementioned 17-year-old, seem genuine for the most part. That is until he meets the literal girl of his dreams, Ramona Flowers. She uses the subspace highway, a hidden dimension route that goes through Scott's head to zip all around Toronto, the setting of this Canadian literary classic. Naturally, he gets obsessed, finds her at a party, and hits her with
"Those are really cool shoes."
This works for all of half a second before
Failure.
He finds out she works at Amazon and orders some CDs online, hoping she delivers them to him. Before the CDs can arrive, though, he spends the day with Knives. This scene mirrors the one from the previous chapter, but this time Scott is apathetic to everything Knives has to say. As they say their goodbyes, Knives plants a kiss on Scott that he was totally not about. A few days later, Ramona herself actually delivers the CDs. They chat for a bit and make plans to hang out that evening. That night, they meet at the park, get a little bit into their backstories, and head back to Ramona's. The night ends with them making out, Scott having cheated on Knives. Chapter 5. Everything's starting to get complicated. Things get weird when both Knives and Ramona show up at a show for Scott's band, Sex Bob-omb. During their performance, Scott is assaulted by Ramona's first evil ex, Matthew Patel. Scott blocks and unleashes a 64-hit combo in return. Scott and his friends hit this sick pose, and with the power of friendship and courage and whatever, Scott defeats Matthew Patel. Scott and Ramona get out of there and make their relationship official, with Scott accepting the task of defeating all of Ramona's evil exes. They smooch, but the mood takes a turn when Scott brings up someone Ramona mentioned earlier, Gideon. The moment she hears his name, her head starts to give off an ominous glow. This volume 1 comes to a close. Book 1 is a strong start to the series, short and sweet. While I was rereading it for the second time, I could not stop hearing the dialogue and voices from the movie as I reread certain scenes. Speaking of the movie, most of Book 1 is featured in the movie in some way or another. And overall overlap between the original and the film adaptation is highest in Book 1. Since they're so similar, it's hard not to compare the two when there's something I think the movie did better. I don't think it makes sense for Knives to be fighting alongside Scott versus Matthew. The two of them are talking about how they're fighting over Ramona. Not enough that Ramona, who's on the balcony, shares a story about her and Matthew's history. By the time the story's over, Knives is by his side with the rest of the squad. I think it makes more sense the way it played out in the movie, where she faints from excitement only the way an enthusiastic teenager could. She misses the fight, and it makes sense how blindsided she is when Scott breaks up with her and she finds out about Ramona. This criticism would be much less harsh if it weren't for the fact that the song Crash and the Boys play, that knocks out the audience, would have been the perfect opportunity for her to miss the fight. I mean, like, she's in the audience. She's literally right there. I see her. I digress. I'm going to stop talking about the movie now and give you my spoiler warning for the rest of the series. If you've already seen the movie but have been meaning to read the comics, this is your chance to book it and avoid spoilers, because this is where the stories start to diverge. Get it? Book it? Because they're booked. Book 2 is good. This volume is a lot of setup, introducing some secondary characters and also some primary ones, giving Scott some welcome backstory. The first chapter is actually animated and aired on Adult Swim as promotion for the movie.
What are you in for?
I got in a fight. An awesome fight.
Did you win?
Not really.
The flashback features him in high school, where we see him become friends with a girl named Lisa, and eventually win the heart of Kim after rescuing her from a dude at a rival school named Simon Lee.
Mercy. Please, I've been a fool.
There's a brief montage of their relationship, but it comes to a sudden end when Scott's family moves to Toronto. Who is Kim, you ask? This is Kim. Kim Pine. She plays the drums in Scott's band, and it's kind of just normal, with the perfect amount of sarcasm. A lot. She's arguably the fandom's favorite character, and I get it. After pressure from his roommate Wallace, the actual best character, Scott breaks up with Knives right as she confesses her love for him. Ouch. Scott introduces Ramona to Kim and his other friends, Steven Stills, the guitarist of Sex Bomb, and Young Neil. Together they make a vegan shepherd's pie, which actually looks pretty good. Let's see how it tastes. That was weird. Knives spies on the gang while they're eating dinner and sees that Scott's with Ramona. She gets consumed by jealousy and resentment directed to Ramona, but is blind to the ways that Scott mistreated her. She sees him as this sweet guy that would never cheat on her or do anything bad. In a fit of spontaneity, she dyes her hair and plots to win Scott back. Anyway, Evil X number 2 is Lucas Lee, a famous movie star. Scott prepares for battle by watching some of his movies with Ramona. Her head starts to glow again, but it returns back to normal pretty quick. Can't help but notice something about this movie is awfully familiar. Scott confronts Lucas Lee and gets sucker punched while asking for his autograph and hurled into the nearby castle. As Scott comes to, Lucas Lee suggests that they take a break for a bit. Surprisingly chill dude. Lee reveals that Ramona cheated on him and hides a lot more than she lets on. As he gets up to finish the fight, Scott goads him into an impossible skate stunt, causing a wipeout so hard he explodes. Later, Knives attacks Ramona at the Toronto Reference Library and they have a huge fight. During the fight, Knives recognizes Ramona and realizes that Scott indeed cheated on her. Yep. Yeah, he did. Knives withdraws from the fight, but not before leaving Ramona a handwritten letter. Oh, how nice. Oh.
Bruh.
Meanwhile, Scott gets a call from the ex that completely broke him, Envy Adams. She invites him to open for their band on Sunday and puts them on the guest list for Friday. Friday comes, and as Envy's band, The Clash at Demon Head, starts to play, Ramona tells Scott that the bass player, Todd, is her third evil ex. Volume 3 picks up right where Volume 2 ends off and keeps a swift pace. The entire book takes place over the course of a weekend, but is heavy on flashbacks, diving deep into Scott and Envy's relationship. The gang head backstage before Scott can get the chance to save his progress at a checkpoint. Things are awkward and tense. Knives pipes up but gets socked by the Clash's drummer Lynette. With so much force, she punches the highlights out of Knives' hair. Scott, tired of the current situation, goes after Todd but gets juked. Todd lifts Scott up with his psychic vegan powers and sends him hurtling through the nearby wall. Scott gets tossed around some more, but it's getting pretty late, so they decide to postpone the fight for tomorrow afternoon. Back in the past, Scott and Envy meet during freshman year of college. Envy, or in actuality, Natalie V. Adams, is a nerdy otaku who grows closer to Scott once she joins his college band. They start dating, but she gradually turns into the catty, self-absorbed celebrity we see her as in Book 3. This culminates in them having a huge fight during a New Year's party after Scott gets a horrible haircut. Battleground, Honest Eds. I wasn't even gonna mention Julie in this video, but she is just the perfect description of Honest Eds. I looked it up to see what all the hype was about, and judging from these pictures, yeah, it was like that. Scott and Todd try to kill each other with random equipment and merchandise, but the sinister power of the store is too much for them. Todd has a mental breakdown and accidentally destroys Honest Eds, leading to them postponing the fight again. Scott and Ramona bail on those plans though and just head back to her place, where she dives into her history with Todd. Ramona was dating Lucas Lee until the minute Todd walked by. They dated in high school, and in an act of devotion to prove his love, he punches a hole in the moon for her. Sunday, the Clash at Demon Head are having brunch. Envy leaves to go to the bathroom when the bombshell is dropped that not only is Todd cheating on Envy, but he also cheats on his veganism. Sex Bomb agree to go on with the show later tonight at Lee's Palace, a real-life music venue and the location for the rest of the book. Scott encounters Envy outside in an alley, but they aren't able to have a real conversation, with Scott questioning if they ever had one when they were together. Scott notices knives huddled up near the entrance of the alley. After some hesitation, he walks over and says hi. The two of them talk for the first time since they broke up and have some semblance of closure. While not exactly apologizing, Scott admits that the ways he treated her was wrong. I actually think it's the most tender interaction between the two, and the nicest Scott is to Knives in the whole series. Which kind of sucks, because this is book 3 out of 6, and these are two main characters, but that's Scott Pilgrim for you. His kindness to her in this moment may have contributed to the fact that Knives is still totally in love with him. Before the show, Scott walks around and talks to some of his friends. In between chats, he's approached by these nubile Asian teens. Wait, what's that word? Nubile? I don't know what that means. What does that word mean? Oh, that's a really creepy word. Finally, O'Malley is Asian himself, so this bit is weird for half as many reasons as you initially thought, but still, yikes. I'm putting this in the video because this is why I know what this word means now, and I can't bear this burden alone, so here you go. Sorry. Anyway, Envy confronts Ramona and puts her on tilt after mentioning a venue called the Chaos Theater in New York. Ramona downs her gin and tonic, squares up, and pulls out a big-ass hammer from her apparently infinite pocket dimension pack, the Subspace Suitcase. This is such a good fight. Ramona has all the best fights. She swings around her now iconic hammer, and Envy pulls out some fierce kicks. Also, Wallace is here. I love Wallace. He helps Ramona by distracting Envy, but ironically distracts her too when he leaves to go pee. Envy gets the upper hand, but right before she's about to crush Ramona, Knives comes shooting in and disarms her. Sex Bomb take the stage, distracting everyone with their outfits except for Envy, who seizes the opportunity to try and smush Ramona. Scott swoops in and gets Envy right in her weak point, the back of her knee. By this point, everyone knows that Todd's cheating, except for Envy. Ramona tries to explain it to her, but Envy calls BS because Todd punched a hole in the moon to prove his love for her. Ramona explains that Todd did that for her first, and Envy realizes that's why there's 2 holes in the moon. Envy catches Todd cheating after he finally shows up, and they have a fight, both emotional and physical. Scott steps in to finish the fight, for real this time. However, Todd is still too powerful. Scott is backed up against the wall with no other option. That's when the vegan police show up. The gelato that Todd had that afternoon comes back to bite him in the ass, and he's stripped of his vegan powers. Now powerless, Scott finishes the job with a killer headbutt. Once the dust and loose coins settle, an extra life for Scott appears. Sex Bomb plays their show, now as the headliner. Everybody loves them except for this mysterious weirdo that Scott notices as he walks out. The next day, Scott and Envy share an awkward goodbye, wrapping up book 3. I'm reading through the colored edition for this video, and the coloring choices really start to pop in volume 3. These dramatic shots of Ramona and Envy are super striking. The monochrome Band-Aid dots style with an all-white background creates a contrast that just doesn't hit the same in black and white. To me, the Infinite Sadness is really interesting for mirroring Ramona's and Scott's relationships with their exes. I mean, their exes are dating. It's genius. Ramona and Envy both have Moon hole-punching backstories involving Todd, and I love the detail that their perception of these events is reflected in the art style of their flashbacks. Ramona doesn't look back with any level of fondness, so she tells the story in a matter-of-fact tone. The art is distinct enough to differentiate as a flashback, but still has relatively high fidelity. Meanwhile, Envy's flashback reads like a fairy tale. Her childish naivete can be seen through the crudeness of her backstory's visuals, as if they were drawn with crayon. The colored version allows for an added dimension to this detail. She looks back with rose-tinted glasses, so her entire flashback is blanketed in pink. Ramona's is still in black and white, with the sole exception being her hair. The lack of color represents how emotionally distant she is when she looks back at her past. Moving over to the guys, Todd is presented as a foil to Scott. Out of all of the evil exes, Scott is the most similar to Todd. They both play bass, they both dated Ramona and Envy, and they're both cheating. This duality is placed front and center with their outfits in the Honest Ed's fight. I mean, look at them. To drive the point home, after defeating Todd, Scott is rewarded with a 1-up. Hell, their names are basically the same. And apparently there's a story behind that. In case you didn't know, the name Scott Pilgrim comes from a song by the band Plumtree. Now there's this guy, Michael Como. This guy in the books I haven't mentioned. Well, not that guy. The guy the character is based off of. He knows Brian Lee O'Malley, and he's got a few bonus comics written about him in the back of Volume 4. According to an artistic representation of Como, written and drawn by the man himself, the original real-life inspiration for the song was someone by the name of Scott Ingram. So it all came full circle with Ramona's third evil ex, Todd Ingram. Volume 4 opens with the beach episode, meaning Scott Pilgrim was anime before it was officially anime. This volume features a lot of shifts and transitions for our characters. Some of them move, Sex Bomb starts recording an album, and Scott and Ramona take their relationship to the next level. Things have been going well between the two of them, but a rough conversation introduces a tension that carries on throughout this volume. Scott struggles to come up with thoughtful reasons why he likes Ramona, and Ramona realizes that Scott doesn't really know much about her, including her age, even after 4 months of dating. She tells him that he could always just ask her, but when he does, she refuses to answer him. A heat wave hits Toronto, so Scott goes to the mall to enjoy the extravagant luxury of air conditioning. While he's there, he runs into his old best friend, Lisa Miller. They catch up and stuff and meet up the next day. The new chill spot is a bar called Sneaky D's, which is another real-life location that's actually in Toronto. I gotta be honest, Scott losing track of the conversation because the sound of the nachos drowns out everyone else is literally me. Like, this happens every time I eat nachos, and like it happens with. But yeah, definitely the most relatable moment of the series for me. Anyways, after some encouragement from Ramona, Scott starts looking for jobs by asking his friends if any of their jobs have openings. Scott is getting stalked by Knives, but it seems like Knives has a stalker of her own. Scott ends up getting a job working with Steven Stills at a vegetarian restaurant. Soon after getting the job, Scott and Kim are chased by the man that was following Knives. They manage to escape by ducking into subspace. Later, on his way home from work, Scott gets jumped by this blonde chick, but she disappears as suddenly as she attacked. A few days later, he sees her and Ramona at his job, and he confronts them both. He eventually gets it through his skull that she's Ramona's fourth evil ex. Her name is Roxanne Richter, aka Roxy. Scott doesn't want to fight her because she has a sword, so he hops into Ramona's subspace suitcase and they try to get away. They all end up in subspace and Ramona starts fighting her. She lands some clean hits, but is caught off guard and then shoved to the ground. Roxy once again dips, leaving Scott and Ramona confused. After another night at Sneaky D's, our main couple have a huge fight over Lisa Miller. Ramona leaves Scott behind with a cold, "Good night, Scott." Back at his place, Scott walks in on Wallace having sex and gets kicked out for the night. But not before Wallace lets Scott know that he got fired from his job. With nowhere else to go, Scott spends the night at Lisa's. Lisa admits that she's been dressing provocatively to try and get Scott to notice her. When she learns about the big fight that they had, she tries to make a move on our protagonist. Scott brushes her off and goes off on a rant about how he's in love with Ramona. Off screen. With the newfound fire lit inside of him, Scott rushes towards Ramona, and then in the complete opposite direction to try and get his job back. Somehow this works, and he's back working with Steven Stills again. He walks into a coffee shop and sees Knives right as the man that was chasing him earlier shows up. Turns out, it's Knives' dad. Naturally, another chase ensues, and we're back in subspace. Scott looks around and realizes that he's in Ramona's dream. She's kneeling beside a dark, shadowy figure and blissfully acts subservient to it. Ramona notices Scott and tackles him out of her head. She is pissed. Scott is fully transparent about the fact that he spent the night at Lisa's, and it completely deflates Ramona. In an attempt to comfort her, Scott tries to tell Ramona that he loves her, but is interrupted by Roxy from inside Ramona's apartment. He learns that she's been staying with Ramona, and for the first time, Scott's head starts to glow. Ramona tells him to walk it off, and he meanders away in a daze. He collapses in front of a dark, shadowy version of himself, but charges straight through it on his way back to Ramona. Mr. Chow bursts into Ramona's apartment after following Scott through subspace. After being called a pussy by his girlfriend and her ex, Scott buckles down and tells Ramona that he loves her. With the power of love in his hands, Scott faces off against Roxy in a final showdown. Scott emerges victorious, gains the respect of Mr. Chow and Ramona's love, as she expresses her feelings for him too. Following action time, Scott and Ramona move in together, Sex Bob-omb is recording their album, and the gang wish Lisa a fond farewell as she heads to the States. Scott asks Ramona how old she is, and she reveals that she's 24 years old, as the two of them enjoy a tender moment under the night sky, wrapping up Book 4. I really like Book 4. It feels like the beginning of the end game of the series, if that makes sense. All of the characters have been established enough that you can see the trajectory of their character arcs, yet you don't know for sure where they're gonna end up. I think Scott confessing his love for Ramona is my favorite moment in the series. With any relationship, fictional or otherwise, there's a huge amount of tension surrounding that first.
I love you.
Timing, mood, location are just a few of the many details going into it, determining if it's a memorable experience or a lackluster afterthought. And I think this book checks every one of those boxes. The final words that Scott says to Ramona hit the hardest for me. I know we can make this relationship work. Scott earns every single point of the 9,999 XP he gains by leveling up his relationship with Ramona. The power of love being represented by a sword that he uses to cut down the baggage of an ex is just the icing on top of this wonderful lovey-dovey cake. Let's talk Ramona for a second. In Book 4, we see more of her personality than ever before, as she slowly becomes less mysterious to both the reader and Scott. While it's great that we get to see more of our main love interest, some of the things she doesn't paint her in the best light. She cheats on Scott by making out with Roxy when she stays at Ramona's apartment. It's an example of the types of behaviors that her evil exes have alluded to, but the first time it manifests in her relationship with Scott. Despite that, I don't think it ruins the moment between Scott and Ramona saying I love you for the first time. Scott is wrapped up in the excitement of his feelings for Ramona while still possessing the conviction he mentioned a moment ago. Although not explicitly stated, his acceptance of this comes from his newfound love and willingness to make things work. I've never been cheated on myself, and even in a hypothetical situation, don't see myself forgiving the other person, but that's a decision that everyone needs to make for themselves. And in this situation, I personally think that Scott's choice makes sense for his character. I feel for Roxy as I reread Volume 4. I think she's definitely the most sympathetic of all the evil exes by far. She still has feelings for Ramona despite all of the ways she's hurt her, and their interactions are way more interesting as a result. You can feel the hurt she carries coming off of each page she's printed on. Her hookup with Ramona is glossed over almost immediately and not mentioned once thereafter. I just talked about how Scott getting over this is indicative of his love for Ramona, but that's only really the case if you take what happened at face value and not as the gag it is in the book. I think this plays into the mid-2000s perception of queerness, what with Ramona's bisexuality being called a phase and her cheating with Roxy not being taken that seriously. But yeah. There's definitely more to unpack there, but I doubt you want to hear a straight guy ramble about stuff he doesn't really get, so I'm going to leave it there with the stuff that stood out to me. Back to Miss Richter herself. I love her failed one-liners when she first encounters Scott. Although let's be real, they only really fail because Scott's an idiot. If Ryan Lee O'Malley ever releases side stories for the secondary characters, Roxy is at the top of my wish list. There's still so many cool questions surrounding her. Why is she only a half ninja? Where does her insecurity come from? What kind of art does she make? She's just a cool character all around. Plus, instead of coins, she bursts into these cute little woodland critters and oh my god, Mr. Chow is holding one of the bunnies. Okay, new headcanon. Mr. Chow takes the bunny home and it becomes the Chow residence's new pet. Yeah. Yeah. September 27th is Scott Pilgrim's birthday. Before he blows out the candles, he pledges to be the best 24-year-old ever and wins his birthday. About a month later, at Julie's Day of the Dead party, Scott encounters the next two evil exes, Kyle and Ken Katsunagi, the twins. The twins summon a robot to try and defeat Scott, but he makes short work of it. Knives and Steven Stills are talking while the fight goes on, and Knives picks up on the fact that Ramona doesn't know Scott's a cheater. Scott and Ramona are living that cohabitation life. She goes out to run a boatload of errands and just asks Scott to unload the dishwasher, but she leaves her phone and naturally he plays games on it all day. She asks him to charge it since he ran out the battery, and when he opens the drawer to reach for the charger, he notices something. A letter addressed to Gideon. Scott slams the drawer and acts like nothing happened. Later that night, Ramona asks Scott if he'd like her hair really long like Envy's. She wonders if he ever thinks about her and is amazed that he doesn't and how quickly he can move on from relationships. As the two eat their dinner, she stares blankly at her reflection in the window. More time passes and Sex Bob-omb have a show lined up for the first time in months. However, they haven't practiced in ages because they've been recording their album. They decide to practice a song and it's not looking good. The day of the show arrives and they are not any more prepared. Scott, the screw-up that he is, botches the coordination of the set list, leading to the band preparing to play different songs. I don't know why it's this moment, but I think it's the only time a book has made me physically cringe from secondhand embarrassment. Thankfully, we don't see that disaster as we pivot to the ladies' room where Knives confronts Ramona. They end up fighting again, with Knives possibly dropping my favorite line in the entire series. When the dust settles, Knives reveals to Ramona that Scott cheated on her. The fiasco with the band ended up working out, sort of, because the whole thing was a setup for the twins to ambush Scott with another robot. Ramona tells Scott that she needs some me time, so he spends the night at Wallace's and crashes on Kim's couch the night after that. Scott orchestrates a setup to meet up with Ramona using Kim as bait, and it surprisingly works. The topic of cheating is brought up, and it makes Ramona's head start to glow again. Kim gets alarmed and points it out to Ramona, who starts freaking out herself. However, the glow is gone by the time the girls go to check it out in the bathroom mirror. The three of them agree to go to another one of Julie's stupid parties. At the party, Scott gets jumped by the biggest robot yet, and Ramona is brooding on the balcony. She is pissed. Her head glowing, she screams at Kim, who quickly thinks to snap a pic of her incandescent cranium. While Scott fights the robot, the girls talk about the glow. Kim tries to learn what Ramona knows about it, but Ramona says she can't tell her. Scott defeats the robot, and the three of them down a whole bottle of Jose Cuervo Especial. They leave the party and go their separate ways. Scott and Ramona take subspace back to their place, but Kim gets kidnapped by the twins while waiting for the subway. Ramona stays up thinking. She can't sleep. Eventually, she asks Scott if he cheated on her with Knives. Scott clarifies that he cheated on Knives with her. This upsets Ramona like nothing before, and her head shines brighter than ever. They have a huge fight that Scott is barely conscious for. He begs her not to break up with him and promises that he'll defeat the rest of the exes and make everything work right before passing out. Scott awakens to a text from Kim detailing her kidnapping. Ramona, who was in the shower, fails to hear any of Scott's explanation before he dashed out the door. She checks her phone, but of course it's dead, so she can't see Kim's text. In the midst of his battle with the twins, Scott learns that each twin was treated on by Ramona with the other. Scott is surprised by this information for some reason, even though several people have told him that she's a cheater, one of those people being Ramona herself. Kim, freezing her ass off while trapped in a cage against her will, tries to get Scott to save her, but it's no use. He's not listening to her. That is until she makes a bluff saying she got a text from Ramona. Kim says that Ramona believes in Scott and that she can't wait for him to come home. The lie works, and it lights a fire inside Scott strong enough for him to defeat the twins. Scott rushes back to Ramona as fast as he can. He explains that he rescued Kim, defeated the twins, and that they said some stuff about her. He continues saying that as long as they have love for each other, they can make this work. Scott searches for her in every inch of her apartment, but she's disappeared without a trace. That is, except for the letter she wrote to Gideon. Her cat rushes out of the front door. Scott chases after it and gets locked out immediately. He crashes at all of his friends' houses in between unsuccessful attempts at luring the cat back. Eventually, his parents set him up with a new apartment. Kim makes the decision to move back home. As she steps on a bus to leave Toronto behind, Scott apologizes for himself, an apology that Kim graciously accepts. After settling into his new place, Scott opens the letter. After reading it, he gets a phone call. The person on the other line, Gideon Graves, Ramona's last evil ex-boyfriend. Since I just brought it up, let me talk about Kim's farewell. At first, Scott vaguely apologizes for everything. A common yet empty remark that touches on everything and nothing at the same time. It doesn't actually address the things one should be held accountable for. He briefly considers the ways that he wrongs Kim and realizes that in those circumstances, it was his fault. He apologizes to her about himself, something that she can actually forgive him for. To me, this scene is about accountability and how at the end of the day, if we want to be better people, we need to take responsibility for the things we've done wrong. These 8 panels really captured me. It's hard to explain. Something about how Kim's final words would have been, "It's not your fault," but they end up being, "Apology accepted," all because Scott chose to have some self-awareness. I think it's a really special moment for his character, and I think we all can learn from it. Volume 5 is very Ramona heavy, so let's get into that. We see more of her internal conflicts throughout this book, thanks to Brian Lee O'Malley's low-key haunting illustrations. In the 2 scenes where Scott is droning on about X-Men or whatever, we see Ramona staring at the mirror, but she does not like what she sees. Or maybe it's that she doesn't recognize herself. In the beginning of the book, she tries on half a dozen outfits and slays in every one, but still she's not happy with her look. She's not happy with herself. Later, when they're getting ready for the party, she's staring in the mirror with her hair down and this blank expression on her face. What is she looking for? The glow? Herself? A future? On the next page, we see her at the party with her hair tied up to look shorter. Short, like it does just before she vanishes. There's a real juicy chunk of irony in how Ramona admires Scott's ability to move on from previous relationships. This power that amazes her is his most toxic trait, but we'll get into that more in book 6. Scott Pilgrim is depressed. He spends all of his time playing on his PSP Go, which totally was a thing in 2006. It's been 4 months since Ramona disappeared. Wallace stops by and gives him a pep talk and encourages him to get out there and meet new women to get over Ramona. He goes to a show for Steven Stills' new band since Sex Pop Bomb is no more. Scott sees Knives there, who recently turned 18. He naturally acts like a total creep to her and is given a lesson in maturity by the 18-year-old. In seemingly the same night, Scott spots Envy at a party and acts like an awkward dick to her. Sometime soonish after that, she calls him up and they grab a coffee. That night, Scott sees Ramona's cat outside of his window and he brings it into his apartment. Scott and Envy meet up again the next day and briefly talk about their past. She calls Scott out for his selective memory and wishes for him to remember her, since he's the only one to really know her before she got famous. "This is the only me he knows," she says, referring to Gideon, who stands right in front of Scott. Scott bolts it out of there and doesn't look back. Next we see him, he's boarding a bus to visit Kim up north for a wilderness sabbatical. They talk and enjoy a nice moment in the woods when Scott suddenly kisses her. Kim is initially shocked, but briefly kisses Scott back before shoving him off. Scott is confused because Kim has always been there for him in an uncomplicated kind of way. Kim reminds Scott that their relationship didn't go down the way he remembers it. Scott didn't even tell Kim directly that he was moving away, and Simon Lee wasn't this big bad guy, but Scott still beat him up anyway. After Kim tells him the truth of his past, Scott's head starts to glow again. He's already primed and ready to forget this conversation even happened when he notices a shadow lurking in the bushes. It's the Nega Scott. He charges mindlessly into battle with his shadow, while Kim pleads with him to embrace the mistakes he's made in life. Scott resists, fearful that he won't be able to live with himself. Nega Scott gets the upper hand and readies one final blow. In this moment, the only thing Scott can think of is Ramona, the girl he fell in love with, the one he's been fighting for over the past year. He sees the opportunity to do things right and avoid the mistakes of his past. A brief silence looms, and the two Scotts merge into one. Kim gives him one final pep talk and a kiss for good luck she promises will never happen again. Our hero is coming home. Envy and Gideon are discussing her outfit for the debut of her solo album and yada yada yada. Anyway, Scott shows up at Gideon's club, the Chaos Theater, and everyone he's ever known is there. Wallace, Stephen Stills, Knives, and a bunch more characters I didn't mention in this video. Eventually, Envy's performance starts. The first song is a warning for Scott, who barely dodges a sucker punch from Gideon. Their fight commences, but they both realize that neither of them knows where Ramona is. Infuriated, Gideon thrusts into Scott and steals the power of love, causing him to level down. Gideon offers Scott an invitation to the League of Evil Exes, but Scott refuses. Swiftly after Scott's rejection, Gideon plunges the power of love sword deep into Scott's chest. His lifeless body slumps to the floor. Scott Pilgrim is dead. Scott opens his eyes and finds himself in subspace. Standing before him is the one and only Ramona Flowers. She explains she left because she needed to find herself. In the last days of their relationship, she was pretty messed up, and she was afraid that she would get him messed up too. Of course, we know Scott got messed up anyways, but Ramona believed that he was tough and that he'd be able to move on quickly like in his other relationships. The reason she came back wasn't for Scott though. It was for herself. She needed to apologize to him for all the ways she was a shitty girlfriend. Scott doesn't care, and having already forgiven her, goes in for a kiss. The extra life Scott had appears, and he respawns on the dirty club floor, with Ramona emerging from his heart. She squares up against Gideon, who after seeing Ramona, reveals his ultimate evil master plan. A cryo chamber emerges from the ceiling, revealing all of Gideon's exes, frozen with the intent of having them all go out with him again. He unleashes a psychic damage Kamehameha on Scott, Ramona, and the crowd around them. Everybody hit by the blast begins to glow. Round 2. Gideon starts fighting Scott, and Scott starts fighting Ramona? The glow has them bickering, while Gideon continues his onslaught. Ramona doesn't see a path to victory, and tries to disappear again, while Scott begs her not to go. What a dick. While Ramona lies on the floor bleeding, Gideon finally explains what the glow is. Sort of. It's like an emotional virus that traps you inside of your own head with all of your issues. Ramona was using it to disappear, vanishing into the subspace of her own head. She did the same to Scott that she did to Gideon. She ran away. With Ramona in his arms, Scott gets a clue as to how Gideon gets inside of Ramona's head and slips into Ramona's subspace suitcase. There he confronts the Gideon inside of Ramona's head. He transforms into this hulking titan, but Scott headbutts him, infecting him with the glow, which reverts him back to his base form. Scott gets sliced and is on the verge of defeat when the Ramona on the inside becomes the Ramona on the outside, the Ramona that is done with Gideon's shit. She towers over him as all the other parts of herself take a stand against them. In a last-ditch petty dick move, Gideon tries to take out Scott. Ramona grabs the power of love and stands armed and ready to take Gideon down. Envy tries to offer Gideon support, but he's a total dick to her, surprising no one. Upon seeing this, Scott thinks about how his previous relationships have ended. He looks back and he sees his friends. He sees the that he was through the that Gideon is. This earns Scott the power of understanding, and he stands right beside Ramona, ready to end this. Gideon pulls out a secret sword that he stashed in Envy's dress because, of course, he'd do that. Their swords clash as they work their way to the top of the stage. In one final clash, Ramona is able to disarm Gideon. With his final words, he tries to sully their victory, saying that they're their own worst enemies. That doesn't work, however, because he's the actual worst, and he's all like, huh? Scott and Ramona sentence him to his fate and finish him off with a badass cross slash. Gideon defeated, the League is no more. Envy approaches and hugs Scott, giving him the closure he was hoping for in Volume 3. She finishes her performance and unfreezes Gideon's exes. Hooray! Speaking of closure, Scott gets his old job back, starts a new band with Kim, and wishes farewell to Knives before she leaves for college. There's a bunch of other stuff that happened, but unless you read the books, I didn't really give enough context for you, so go read the books, I guess. In the end, Scott Pilgrim and Ramona Flowers meet at the steps where their first date began. They hold hands, ready to start all over, and enter a door into the unknown. Our journey has come to an end. Despite being the longest book in the series, Volume 6 just whizzes right by you, and before you know it, it's all over. I think part of the pace is attributed by how many full-page spreads there are in this volume. So many big moments are given the time and space they deserve, with full pages of beautiful art by Brian Lee O'Malley, all the more so in the colored version. I think the art in the series gets better with each issue, and Volume 6 helps me stand by that statement. I love Scott as a vessel for all of Scott's character flaws. Let's be honest. For the entire series, Scott is a real jerk who doesn't care how his actions affect people. He chooses to be a blissful idiot with a selective memory, so he doesn't need to remember his misdeeds. Once he faces himself, though, he sees all of the hurt he's caused and decides to become a better person. I myself can relate to that on a real personal level. In the past, I displayed a lot of avoidant behaviors when it came to relationships. It was a lot easier for me to pretend like things were fine or avoid certain subjects because I knew there would be difficult conversations or maybe even turn into fights. It took my own not evil ex to show me my nega self, and it was a lot of hard work to correct myself. Taking a minute to reflect, it was kind of like a combination of Scott and Ramona's worst traits. Running away from my problems while also feigning ignorance of the things causing them. Speaking of Ramona, I feel like she low-key doesn't show up as a character until book 4. She's so mysterious for the first half of the series that a lot of her character is just left unknown. It's a legit plot point in book 4 that Scott doesn't know what her age is. I think Brian Lee O'Malley wrote her this way to put us as the readers in the same headspace as Scott. She's so cool and badass and stylish that we fall in love with her, even though there's really not a lot to dig into there. That is until books 4, 5, and 6. I've already talked about her in books 4 and 5, so let me take this moment to talk about Volume 6, Ramona. First off, her design in this book is the peak of the series. She just looks so badass, dude. Her jacket, her dress, the star pin. Mwah. O'Malley was really cooking on this one. After the final battle, she and Scott start talking and she kind of just summarizes her character. She was always running to escape the changes that the universe forces on all of us. She believed that if she kept changing herself, nothing else could impose a change on her. Ramona sees life as a flowing river, and she wanted to keep riding down the stream. Holding on to other people is how you got stuck, and she feared that more than anything else. Not being able to progress, not being able to make the changes that kept her in control of her fate, she just couldn't accept it. It's ironic how Ramona sees Scott as being so tough for getting over relationships quickly, even though his method is unhealthy too. Ramona runs away from people because she fears stagnation, while Scott chooses to forget his sins so that he never has to change. Their toxic traits are inverses of each other. Scott and Ramona are basically the yin and yang of shitty partners. It's no coincidence that they end up together in the end. They were made for each other. One thing I like about the series that I think is low-key overlooked is the glow. It first appears at the end of Volume 1 and remains a mystery until the final showdown. Gideon, the dick that he is, reveals that he created it. He says it's a psychological weapon engineered to trap victims in their own heads with all of their negative emotions. Anxiety, anger, sadness, and shame, just to name a few. all the bad thoughts locked away with you in a prison of your own mind. This explanation recontextualizes all of the times we see Ramona's and Scott's heads glow. The mention of her most recent ex, bringing up the unresolved feelings there, thinking about how Scott cheated, the jealousy and insecurity she feels over Lisa Miller. In Volume 4, we see Scott's head glow for the first time when he learns that Roxy spent the night at Ramona's. This puts him in such a daze that he wanders in and out of traffic and collapses in the street. He looks up to see Scott looming over him as if to invite him to forget what happened, to forget his pain. Outside of the final battle, the only other time Scott's head glows is when Kim tells him about the bad stuff he did in high school. He tries to forget what she told him, and that's when Scott appears for the Scott showdown. The glow brings out the worst parts of himself, his negative counterpart. Snapping back to reality, the glow is all around us in the real world. Perpetual rumination of the worst case scenario, obsessing over how a conversation should have gone, anxiety that everyone else just puts up with us and that we're no good. If you've ever been locked in an argument with yourself in the shower, you know what the glow feels like. The glow is such a fitting representation of this because once you're able to see it, it's damn blinding. It's hard to look at directly, but it fills the entire room. You don't need to see the light to know it's there. You feel it. It's the tone of their voice. It's their refusal to look you in the eye. That chilling silence that's lasting way too long. The glow isn't exclusive to feelings about relationships, but relationships have the potential to make it more manageable or your own personal hell. Gideon may be right that there's no cure, but there is effective treatment, and that's talking to people. Sometimes we glow because of misunderstandings or perceptions of others that just aren't true. So get it out there. Listen to their issues and have the courage to relinquish yours. Sharing a burden is better than suffering alone. If you keep it inside, the glow will grow. Sure, the thoughts may keep coming back, but if you have a solid party, things will go a lot smoother than a solo playthrough. Coming back to the series has been a cool experience. Reading lines and gawking at art that would eventually have a solid place in pop culture with a die-hard cult following. That said, there is one element that has not aged as well as the others. It's no secret that Scott Pilgrim was published in a different time. Its original run went from 2004 to 2010, long before use of the R slur was deemed unsavory enough to be nixed from most popular media. I agree with the sentiment that it's silly to expect all fictional characters to be beacons of morality, especially when it comes to language. These books are all about majorly flawed people. I've seen some people online cite the characters' use of this word as an example of how they're not good people in the process of growing. However, I don't think that's what's happening here. Use of the word in the context it was written is different than the context with which it is read today. I sincerely doubt Brian Lee O'Malley intended for this to be an element of these characters. We see it as a flaw of these characters today, when in reality, that's just how a lot of people talked 20 years ago. It's not that I hold this against the books. They are a product of their time, after all. I just had a strong enough reaction to it upon rereading that it got me thinking. Hell, to be honest, I give the books more of a pass than Tarantino.
Shut up.
So, what did we learn here today? In the books, the idea of baggage is made overtly clear through the League. In real life, it's a lot less obvious. For us, defeating the evil exes is coming in contact with your partner's relationship history. Their perception of you, the version of you in the mind of your partner, subconsciously goes toe-to-toe with that of their exes. Our own definitions of love are in large part defined by previous loving relationships. The love we have to offer is compared and contrasted with those previous definitions. That's what battling the evil exes looks like for us. In some ways, our love might be sufficient or even extraordinary. In other ways, we may not be reaching the standards of previously internalized definitions. Getting to know your partner and what they've been through gives you the power of understanding and the ability to love them better than anyone else before. How'd that get there? Scott Pilgrim rules. Well, not Scott Pilgrim, Scott Pilgrim. It's no wonder why the franchise has grown to become the cultural phenomenon it is today. If you've gotten this far and still haven't read through the books, please go check them out. It would be impossible for me to do the humor of the series justice in this format, and I think for that reason alone it's worth a read or reread. Trust me, it's a much more enjoyable experience than listening to some loser on the internet give a cruddy summary and then get a tad emotionally vulnerable with you. Although if you're into that kind of thing, then it pains me to admit it, but there's a good amount of Scott Pilgrim in myself. And although I wouldn't say it to your face, I bet there's a fair bit in you too. Or maybe Ramona, or Wallace, or Steven Stills, or Knives, Kim, Roxy, Envy, Gideon, hell, maybe even Todd. There's so much to cling to in this story, and I think that's why it's been able to resonate with so many people across its many forms. Brilliantly iconic adaptations inspired by the brilliant original series. Does Scott Pilgrim hold up in 2025? Oh yeah.